Alyssa, thank you very much for agreeing to speak to the War Room. Could I ask you to give us a brief introduction of yourself, of your background, your current role?
Yeah, of course. So, Alyssa Gilmore, I'm currently the global head of communications for Bloomberg's financial products businesses, which includes the Bloomberg terminal, the other applications that run on the terminal, the data that runs behind it, our engineering and tech teams. So it's a wide remit and it's a lot of fun. My communications team is a fully blended team, which means we do media relations with analyst relations, market insights, crisis comms, all the fun stuff. I come to that role after about 30 years in financial technology marketing and communications, and I've built 2 analyst relations departments in that.
Thank you, Alyssa. And let's start with the basics. What is analyst relations and how does it differ from public relations?
It's a great question, and it's one that I have to remind my executives of frequently. So the way that I often describe the difference between media relations and analyst relations, and I make that distinction between media and analyst because they're both public relations, is that we do media relations usually for a deadline. We do analyst relations for a lifetime, right? Media relations tends to be shorter form. Sure, you want to build long-term relationships with reporters. I'm not saying that you don't. However, reporters' interests change. They are very story-focused. They're working on generally 1 or 2 things at a time. Whereas an analyst is working on building their expertise over the lifetime of their career. And regardless of where they go, what they do, with whom they speak, what you share with them and what you derive from them and the relationship ultimately that you create extends across all of that. There are analysts that I still talk to frequently, even though I haven't been active in their space in the last 15 years, just because they've got great insights on the world in general or the financial industry in general. And because frankly, we became great friends.
You mentioned that you've built 2 analyst relations teams and your current team is a fully blended, so you don't have a specific analyst relations practitioners. Can you talk to me a little bit more about your approach to analyst relations and communications in your current team at Bloomberg and your approach throughout your career? How has it evolved and what practices have you been applying across the different roles and companies that you have been with in the past?
Sure. That's a massive question. Let me break it down a little bit. Okay. So starting with the way that we're structured currently as a blended team. So I have my team members are subject matter experts in and of themselves. They have to be because we are strategic advisors to the executives who lead our business. In order to play that role, we need to be aware not just of our business goals and objectives, but also all the external noise that should and could influence the way that we build our products, position our brand, create our narratives. And we want to make sure that those are consistent, right? So we use analyst relations in a blended team as in some ways the engine for a lot of that listening and learning. So we do consume a tremendous amount of analyst research through subscription. We also are responsible for procuring bespoke research when that's required. We use that research to inform all of our product, sales, support, specialist teams, our technology and engineering teams as appropriate, even our government relations and regulatory teams to ensure that we all are looking at a broad base of market intelligence beyond which what we get from our customers and our partners. We do the same thing on the media side. We're always constantly listening, looking at our coverage as well as coverage of topics of interest and areas that are adjacent to ours. And we commingle all of that into intelligence that feeds back into our business and can inform our product strategies, can inform our go-to-market strategies, can inform our marketing and our messaging. And in fact, the way we re-engage then with the media. So we are both, creators and consumers of all of that market intelligence. We take all of that in conjunction with our business goals and our market targets, and we use all of that to shape really robust communications campaigns. So at the other end of the funnel, we would look at, given what we're trying to achieve in X market and X time frame with X audiences, here are the various channels that we really need to engage. And in that context, then we think of analysts as one of the channels that we engage along with our customers, um, empowering our internal customer facing teams, our employees as advocates, and of course, then, the media. The answer is honestly not tremendously different, except that we didn't have sort of one person dedicated to a line of business doing all of those things, right? So when I ran discrete analyst relations departments, we would plug into all of those same groups as well as our media relations team, right? But we were still always doing that inbound intelligence gathering, the advisory component of analyst relations, as well as that outbound advocacy component of analyst relations with all of those various consumer types. It was just that we didn't blend the media and analyst within one team. So they would become another consumer group or another advocate group. Again, because I've always taken this 360 approach to analyst relations, transitioning that to a more blended approach wasn't that difficult. It just honestly required some retraining of my staff. And that's been a great benefit to them because they've expanded their awareness of what influence and advocacy means on the broader stage, and they've added a few arrows to their capabilities quivers.
So just mentioned that you've expanded the capabilities of your staff. What were the kind of the common perhaps difficulties, if I could say it that way, or the way of thinking that people had to come to terms with and or perhaps had to change if they come from a purely media marketing PR background and to change it for analyst relations? Because we know that there are differences.
There
Um,
are.
and analysts don't appreciate being treated as journalists and as another PR channel.
And you're exactly right. And there is an education that has to occur. We have a analyst relations 101 training deck that everyone who joins my team has to go through. And we also have separate spokesperson training policies and practices for our spokespeople. We train them differently to engage with analysts than with the media. So I would say with my team in particular, the greatest challenge was sort of having them understand that analyst relations is not as transactional as media relations tends to be. We talked about that at the top of our conversation, you know, media relations being for a deadline, analyst relations being for a lifetime. And I've really had to refocus them around relationship creation and understanding the needs of the analyst and where the analyst comes from and trying to meet them where they are instead of pitching them a story that they don't want to hear. So we've spent a lot of time talking about how analyst briefing is different than media briefing and the kinds of information that you can bring to an analyst conversation, but also the kinds of information you can take out of that conversation and how powerful that is. Because analysts are also generally much more willing, even in a briefing, to show you a little of their hand and what they're thinking, especially if you're skillful at extracting that information during a briefing, which I know most of your audience probably is. So that's not always the case with a journalist. Journalists want to hold their cards a lot closer to the vest. So when you're a communications professional and you can go into a conversation that is actually conversational on the topic that you want to discuss, it's a relevation. How do I now try to replicate this more in some of my media conversations? And that's actually the path that I challenge my team to take, is once you see how you can have these conversations with analysts, let's rethink how that informs our approach to media relations. Can we actually have less combative and more collaborative conversations with reporters if we approach them a little bit more the way we do analysts? And I've actually found a lot of journalists, especially those in niche areas, who are more like analysts in their deep understanding of industry topics, we've found a really positive response. It's helped us actually nurture better media relationships because we've trained on analyst relations.
I want to draw on your experience from Bloomberg and from the rest of the companies that you have worked in and understand what determines your approach to analyst relations, and also how your thinking and perspective of analyst relations has changed through the years from the very first time you started working in the industry to.
Okay, so let me start with the latter part of your question, which might bring us back to the first part of your question. So I was first exposed to industry analysts as a product marketer. Communications is a later stage part of my career. So I was a product marketer, tops to tails, front to back, looking at the entire market space, helping determine what sort of products we built, and then shepherding those through the funnel to go to market. And I became aware of analysts because when I was doing my voice of market, market intelligence, and competitive intelligence gathering, I was shared, as I later found out inappropriately, a couple of analyst research reports, and I found them very helpful. I didn't really understand. I thought they were newsletters. This is back in like the 90s. Right? Newsletters were just becoming a really big thing. So I just thought, oh, these must be great newsletters that I've gotten a hold of somehow. And I contacted the analyst firm whose reports had been shared with me. And their first question was, how did you get those? And I realized, well, they first told me, you shouldn't have them. How did you get them? And I kind of said, well, how about I don't tell you how I got them, but let's talk about how I can get them directly from you. And I didn't really understand that that was a business model at all, that somebody was selling their observations on an industry, because I was somebody who was doing that internally for free, I guess, back to my stakeholders. So my first exposure to analyst relations was actually as kind of like horse trading. So I didn't have a budget for analyst relations. I didn't know this was a thing you should budget for. I soon did, within a year or two, I developed a budget. But until that time, all my engagements with analysts really had to be bartering, right? What information can I give you of value in order to get the information from you that I value? And I think having that relationship as a product marketer set me up from the very start to value analysts from the intelligence, insights, the learned side of analyst relations more than I did from the earned side. It took me a little longer to understand how much influence they could have on my buyers and other audiences that I cared about in the marketplace. And I think coming to analyst relations with much more of an understanding of the insights and intelligence really reframed the way I approached analysts. I always came to them first with the value they could deliver to me, and only then kind of exploring their reach and the amplification that they could provide. So I had a bias very early on to the intelligence side, and I think that probably persists. I tend not to engage as much with analysts that just have a big soapbox if I don't think that I would gain value from their insights. And maybe that's just because I have lots of other channels that I can use in order to, amplify my message to various audiences. So I value that a little bit less unless I believe an analyst also is really valuable to me from an intelligence standpoint. So I don't know if I circled all the way back to the start of your question there.
I think so, yes. And can you give us some examples of, if we go beyond the basics of analyst relations, can you give us some examples of how analyst insights and the conversations with analysts have shaped the company strategy, the go-to-market, the product, if you are able to?
Yeah, I can't share details about anything that we've done at Bloomberg per se. But I can say broadly, we do engage analysts to help us validate product strategy, especially, to validate customer insights that we've gleaned. We're very close to our customers at Bloomberg. And so we get a lot of information from them about, things that we're thinking about doing. However, there's a bias there. They're already working with us. So we use analyst insights sometimes to complement that customer insight to ensure that people who have not yet chosen to do business with us have some of the same priorities or interests when it comes to the solutions that we would build, because we might like to attract some of them to work with us. So when it comes to sort of shoring up prospective customer insights, that's one of the ways that we certainly use analysts.
Considering that AI is really transforming industries, everyone is looking to implement any AI capabilities or certain AI capabilities, I should say. How do you think this technology will shape our industry, the market research space?
I think in every way. It would be easier to talk about the ways in which AI won't change our industry. And I think there's some great resources out there, and you should definitely invite some folks on who are doing some groundbreaking work right now in AI for analyst relations. I confess that I'm not one of them. We are using certain tools to augment our processes. At this time, I'm still, uh, you know, a little bit old school in the way that I'm working with analysts. But I do think the potential is there. I hope analysts won't be displaced by it. I do think there's a risk of some of their work being displaced by it. I don't necessarily need to make a phone call to get a quick read on something, but I also don't necessarily trust the answers that I'm getting yet from the AI tools that are available to us. So even if I'm going to do my own research, I'm probably still going to ask a trusted analyst to vet that for me and see if it jibes with the way that they're looking at the world. Again, I think a lot of professions, and I would say the same thing for the media relations side of the business. I think there's a lot of professions that have to rethink where our value resides. And if we go back to where we were talking about the ability for analyst relations professionals and analysts to really reinforce this bond of trust in the ecosystem that involves, our joint customers, our stakeholders within the business, stakeholders in the industry. I think that's a value point that's going to be really hard to replicate.
Alyssa, can we talk? So you work for Bloomberg, which is a very big organization, pretty much known by everyone. But what would be your advice for startups and scale-ups? At what stage should they start engaging with analysts, and kind of, is there anything that signals that time where you can say, okay, we have seen this, that, and the other, so we can think about engaging with analysts?
So I think there's a difference between learning from and engaging with in this context. If you have something that's groundbreaking and you want to keep it to yourself for a little while, like if you're pre-fundraising and you're just pulling things together, there's a lot of intelligence you can glean from analysts um, without purchasing a subscription, right? You conference presentations on the web. You can find them being quoted in the media. If they're writing blogs, as you've so wisely suggested, you can glean some intelligence from them. And then, do what I did when I was just learning about analysts. Do a little horse trading, right? You may have information that an analyst would highly value about the direction a market is moving. You don't have to give away all your secrets in order to get a little bit back from one of them. So if you find someone who's being quoted and presenting and maybe writing a blog, and you think, follow their Twitter stream, right? If they're still on, X stream, LinkedIn, wherever they're posting stuff, like that's the point to reach out and say, hey, I'm really interested in this space. I'm, investing myself in this space. I'd love to just, chat with you. Would you be up for it? I think a really good analyst generally would be up for that conversation just to find out if you're doing something interesting. And as we talked about earlier, the best analysts are going to have to get a hold of the new ideas faster because technology is moving faster. So I think that's a conversation that a really good analyst would want to have. At a certain point, obviously, to gain the full value of engaging fully with analysts, you're going to have to make some investments. But if you're doing something really, really exciting, I think you can kind of get far on the horse trading before you get to that point. I'm sorry, analyst firms, if you're listening, but that's your upfront investment to stay relevant.
Absolutely. And also, you mentioned social media. Many of the analysts are not on social media, especially not on LinkedIn, which is the business platform for many people, whether they're freelancers or they work for a certain company. So another tip for analysts, social media is a great tool to build get insights from forward-thinking companies and someone that is doing something great on the market but are not ready to tell their story yet.
It seems so funny to be having this conversation now in 2025. I think I actually was part of like a blog post in 2008 with Jeremiah Ouyang, like talking about this very issue of analysts get on social media. So if you didn't do it in 2008, I guess do it now.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of kind of many new companies, young companies, they don't have unlimited resources. Their resources are always limited. So what would you be your advice for any strategies that they can use to start building their analyst connections and their analyst relations?
Sure. Well, rule number one is the same with small companies as it is with large companies. Stick to your business objectives. Every strategy starts with business goals. So figure out which of your business goals can best be supported through analyst relations and then prioritize. And prioritize your goals, then prioritize the analysts based upon how much return you'll get from them. So if your goal is to be out there and loud and visible, maybe before you even have anything to offer, and that is your top priority goal, then look for analysts with big soapboxes, right? And this obviously I'm oversimplifying to a great degree here, but I would look for analysts with a big presence, with a big voice, who reach lots of people who are relevant to you, to your company. If your top priority is make sure we're building the right thing, then I'd focus more on those analysts who you think have a really good grasp of the market potential, your competitors, where your products are heading more broadly, and use them for validation and prioritize your spend and your human capital there.
In terms of first steps, what would you recommend to be the first steps in the build of analyst relations program?
It's hard to say, again, because it all depends on what your business goals are. But I would remind anyone interested in taking this path that relations is the more important part of analyst relations. And so again, I think reaching out maybe now through some non-traditional channels is more effective. If you find someone who is actually on LinkedIn and doing a great job on LinkedIn, maybe try to connect to them there. Send them an email. Hey, I've been following your posts and I think you've got great insights. And, would you be open to a phone call? Reaching out to a large firm's account rep and trying to go that way is not going to get you that far if they don't think that you would be worth their time. One of the nice things about working with analysts is that most of them are willing to make a, personal/professional connection and then figure out if the broader offering is worth your time. Be people, connect with people.
We have relations in the job title, if I could put it that way. You're not going to become best friends with someone after meeting them for the first time for 30 minutes or an hour. It's a long-term connection that shouldn't really be looked at transactionally as some people do.
If you want them to invest their time in understanding you, you should invest your time in understanding them.
Exactly. Yeah.
It only seems fair.
Yeah, absolutely. Alyssa, just to close our conversation. What is one thing about analyst relations that you think is most misunderstood? And kind of, if you have the chance to set the record straight and just to correct it, what would that be?
So I'm reminded of those memes that are like 5 pictures of like, what my mother or kids or whomever think I do all day versus what I do all day. I think what's most misunderstood about analyst relations is the potential of a great analyst relations program to materially impact the course of a business at a strategic level. Analyst relations professionals, I think, can move on from this position into almost any position in the company because, first of all, we're serving so many stakeholders around the business. Our need to have strong business acumen to do our job well is non-negotiable. You need to understand your business to understand where analysts are going to bring the greatest value to your business. And so you need to be a little bit of a marketer. You need to be a little bit of a PR person. You need to be a little bit of a corporate strategist or an MA person. You need to be a little bit of a CTO. You need to be a little bit of a CIO. You need to be a little bit of a, chief revenue officer. You need to be a little bit of your head of sales, because if you can't put yourself in their shoes, you're probably not driving the optimal value of your analyst relations program back into the business. So because we have to learn to think in all those directions, I think we have a lot of opportunity to grow within our organizations. And I think sometimes we're an undertapped resource when businesses are looking for, who really gets this and who can move up, right? Or maybe they're just so dependent on us that they don't want us to go anywhere. I'd be it too.
Yes, absolutely, because we have to know the different parts of the business in order to do our job very well, whether they are sales, product marketing, messaging, strategy, whatever they are. So yeah, we would perhaps need to be best friends with everyone in the company to be good AR professionals.
Yep, I think that's right.
Alyssa, thank you so much for your time and for speaking with us. It was a pleasure having you.
It's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for inviting me.